Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for being here tonight. Today's session is about revisiting the Islamic Golden Age. Can we please have a big round of applause in welcoming Dr. Roy Casagranda?
Assalamu alaikum. All right, so by now I like to do background, so I'm going to definitely do that. But I'm going to do it in an unorthodox way. We're revisiting the Islamic Golden Age. I've given talks about the Islamic Golden Age in the past, so this isn't going to be redundant. I'm going to do something a little bit different. What I want to do is, instead of asking what was the result of the Islamic Golden Age, I'm going to ask, why did it happen? Because to me, that might be the more important lesson in this moment, right? To figure out what they got right as opposed to what was the ultimate result. The ultimate result was it was the fourth stage in a really long story that's about 6,500 years old of Western civilization. So that's going to bother some of you, so let's back it up and talk quickly about Western civilization. And then what I want to do is I want to briefly talk about what the Islamic Golden Age did so that you know what's at stake. And then from there, I'm going to upend things a little bit, I hope. So, if you've ever taken a Western civilization class, like Western Civ 1, the first chapter is about Egypt and Mesopotamia. And then and maybe that's 1 week out of 16. And then they quickly jump to the Greeks and then spend a bunch of time on the Greeks and the Romans. And then they'll bring in the Dark Ages. Don't talk about that very long, even though it lasted almost 1,000 years. One class, two classes, it's boring, it's very dark, there's no sun. People were really sad, lots of depression. And then jump into Columbus. He has a good time exploring. So cool that we call him an explorer. So neat. It's like Genghis Khan discovered Iran. Anyway, Hitler discovered Poland. And then you jump into the 30 Years' War, which probably lasted 50 years. Europeans weren't really good at counting. And then Western Civ 2 starts. And that's it. Well, Western Civ 2 focuses on Central and Western Europe as if there wasn't anything else in Western Civ, and then that's the end. It covers a little bit less than 4 centuries, totally focused on the Brits and the Germans and the French. So there's like a narrative here. That is, there was civilization was founded in the Middle East. It quickly, as fast as it could, left the Middle East, went to Greece, although I'm having a hard time understanding how Greece isn't part of the Middle East, but we'll set that aside for a second. If you let's make a Greek person stand next to a Turk and an Iranian, and then make them switch places so nobody knows, and then go, okay, pick the Greek out. Like, that would be a fun exercise. And then, or have them bring out their national dishes and set them, okay, which one is the Greek one? Anyway. And then, I know, watch them dance. Oh, listen to their music. Even their alcoholic beverages. Like, it just wouldn't work. So, but that's okay, because Greece is actually closer to England and Sweden. Oh, I know it's not. Anyway, then Western civilization left Egypt and Iraq as fast as it could, went to Greece and Rome, but then it left there too. Right? That's the lesson. And it ended up in Germany, France, and England somehow. And then Germany, France, and England did this wonderful thing. How can you found a civilization and then somehow not be in it anymore? Like, no matter what you do from that point on, if you're Iraq and you founded Western civilization, you will always be Western civilization. It can't not be, because you're the guy who created it. You're the thing, right? How could it be any other way? Even if it went in the way you didn't want it to, you're still Western Civ because you created it. So by the very definition, Iraq can never not be part of the West, which is funny because it's in the Middle East. It's in the eastern part of the West. Maybe that's the conversation we should have. But then, of course, we get in this stupid binary. Well, if there's a Western civilization, there must be an Eastern civilization. There's definitely not an Eastern civilization. There are definitely other civilizations to the east of the Western civilization. But certainly India and China aren't in the same civilization. They have two amazing, profound, world-changing civilizations that did interact with each other. But for that matter, China interacted with Italy. Have you eaten pasta? At the end of the day, right? Pasta that was originally from China, that was brought to Italy in the 8th and 9th century by Arab traders. Isn't that cool? Because the world is intertwined. There's no separating any of it out. We make these crazy boundaries, but they're all illogical, irrational. So the original great age of Western civilization is obviously in its founding. Somewhere around 6,500 years ago, ancient prehistoric Egypt created the world's first government. So a government, I'm going to define government real quick. It is an institution that self-replicates over time, so it's not a one-off thing. If it's a one-off thing, it's not a government. And its specific goal is to change norms, to change economic behavior, and to change political behavior for some sort of outcome on the other side. There's a goal, and then that institution comes in and changes things. It can rewrite your religion, it can tax you, it can set up trade networks, it can build you roads, they can wage wars, whatever. But it's all about trying to achieve whatever that goal is. So about 6,500 years ago, the ancient Egyptians did that. And then 5,400 years ago, the Sumerians did writing. And then 5,100 years ago, Egypt built the world's first ever large state by conquering itself. Upper Egypt went down to Lower Egypt and conquered Lower Egypt and made a big state. Okay. That's the first important period in Western civilization. I want to point out, it kind of ends in the Old Kingdom in Egypt. The fifth ever pharaoh of Egypt was a woman. Her name was Mernit. There was an academy founded during that time period. It was a medical academy. One of the first ever directors of that academy was a woman named Pesachet. And there were lots of women doctors. It was an incredible period where there was serious expansion in human rights, for Egyptians anyway, maybe not for other people. And lots of development happens during that time period, and then ends abruptly with a 170-year-long civil war. Because when the Egyptians did civil wars, they did them. And the next great period in this starts about 3,550 or so years ago. It's the 18th dynasty of Egypt. They discover a really neat trick. You can create convenience with economic surplus. So you can have people's laundry picked up and then done at a laundromat and then delivered back to the house. You can make a list and do groceries, have a person come pick up the list, then go get the groceries and bring it to the house. And they were writing letters to each other and poetry. And it was, if you read the poetry and the letters, you start to think, wow, nothing has changed. We're literally the same people, the same concerns. They had basic training and people would write back saying, oh, I hate basic training. My drill instructor is awful. I'm stuck here in Yar. Yar was the ancient Egyptian word for a middle of nowhere. It was probably like Syria. Because the Egyptians also then built an empire and they conquered Palestine and Syria and part of Turkey. And great times had by all. So the third great age in Western civilization starts about 2,600 years ago. And really, it's Cyrus the Great who kicks it off. He is going to go on a conquering spree and put together an empire that has a Bill of Rights, the world's first ever Bill of Rights, and celebrates diversity and actually proclaims that other religions are not only legal and encouraged, but the state will fund them. So if you have a temple and it's in disrepair, the state will fix your temple for you, no matter what your religion is. And Kurosh actually went out of his way to say, look, I want all the nations to celebrate the way they dress and eat and their languages. And then soon afterwards, the Greeks are doing philosophy. And the next thing you know, the Romans are on a conquering spree and they're smashing the place up and plundering and making really beautiful monuments, some of them dedicated to genocide. So it's a mixed one, right? The Trajan's Tower, it's still there. At the bottom, it shows the Roman legions going off to war. Then it shows them conquering the Dacians, and then it shows them taking them off into slavery and executing them. And you're like, wow, they made a monument to genocide. That's so weird. I'm part Italian, so it's okay. That, of course, comes to an end. And then that gets us to the fourth great age, which is Islamic Golden Age, which is why I wanted to pull all that together just so that you know what's at stake. And then we're in the fifth, right? The one that the Europeans create. So before I go anywhere, I want to talk about the fact that I'm calling it the Islamic Golden Age. That's what it's usually called, but I'm also doing it. I don't think there's a religious component. So that might irritate some of you, but oh well, it happens. I irritate people. One of the reasons I say that is because when the Islamic Golden Age comes to an end, there really is no indication that Islam for several centuries was interested in philosophy or science or math anymore. It abandoned it. By that contrast, when Christianity took over the Roman Empire, it literally burnt its libraries and destroyed its institutions and shut them down. And then, shortly after Columbus goes on his conquering spree, the next thing you know, the Europeans are reinventing a bunch of stuff that was invented in the past. And then, after they've gotten through stealing all those other things, they take us to here where we have these little handheld devices. You can talk to anybody on the planet. And even at one point, we decided to go to the moon, but we discovered it was boring and decided never to do it again. Starting to wonder, like, did aliens contact us and say, stop, you don't leave. You're stuck on Earth. Because, I mean, it's a long time later and we have yet to do anything meaningful. I mean, what's our great achievement? The games on your phone? So boring. Like, let's do something cool. No? The game on your phone is a dopamine delivery device, like it is. Don't get me wrong. I'm totally addicted to my phone. So, okay. If it's not a religious thing, then what is it? Right? If Christianity is just as capable as Islam is both becoming an incredibly innovative society or an incredibly backward society, then there must be something that's happening. So, to tell you my story, I want to start in a place that might feel really random. I want to start in the middle of the 3rd century AD. Rome got into really, really big trouble in the 3rd century AD. Like, it was backed. And they got a Syrian emperor. His name was Elagabalus. He was from Homs. The Romans called it Emesa. And in many ways, the 3rd century for the Roman Empire is a series of stories about Syrians for some reason. In any case, Elagabalus might have been the worst ever emperor in Roman history. In my opinion, he was absolutely the worst. And he triggers a series of chaotic events throughout the 3rd century that are disasters. In the middle of this, there's a Persian emperor named Shapur the First. I'm still trying to figure out why his son, Shapur the Second, is Shapur the Great, because I really feel like it should have been Shapur the First. I think somebody made a mistake, and it was actually Shapur the First, and they accidentally gave it to Shapur the Second, but I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something about Shapur the Second I need to look into. So Shapur the First is the second ever Sasanian emperor. And what he does is, from a military standpoint, extraordinary. He goes to war with the Romans, and he ends up fighting Gordian III. Gordian actually beats them in a battle, and then a few months later they have a second battle in Iraq, and Gordian dies. Shapur wins the battle. It's so bad that the next emperor, Philip the Arab, the next Roman emperor, basically just goes and surrenders to the Persians and promises to give the Persians a lump sum of gold every year. It's a catastrophe. The Romans are filled with shit. A few years go by, a few years of peace, and the Romans don't want to pay this lump sum of gold every year anymore. So they break the treaty, and Shapur goes, it's on, and the Roman Emperor Valerian comes, and they fight out a battle in 260 AD, and the Romans are beaten so badly. It's such a humiliating rout. 2 entire Roman legions are captured intact with Emperor Valerian. He's the first ever Roman emperor captured. There will be others. Romanus IV gets captured. Right? He's not the last to get captured, but he's the first. So, Shapur, it turns out, had a lot of style. One of the things that was cool about Roman legionnaires is they were all engineers. And Shapur liked engineers because they could build things. So he takes these Roman legions and he goes, I want you to build me 2 brand new cities, Bishapur and Gondishapur. And so the Romans build these cities for a choice, the prisoners of war, right? They're just going to do it. So they build them in Roman architecture. So these 2 cities go up in Roman architecture in the Persian Empire. Shapur makes Gondishapur. I wonder where Shapur, why you kept calling Shapur and Gondishapur. It must be a coincidence. Anyway, he makes Gondishapur his capital. He built a miniature version of the city on the side. So he had a palace, and then he had a miniature palace. He had all, bakery, marketplace, theater, and then he has a miniature marketplace on the side. Like there's like 2 cities built into each other, but one small. And when the Romans were done building these, he took Emperor Valerian to the small palace and went, this is your palace. You get to live the rest of your life here. And Valerian's like, wait, you're not going to execute me or something? And Shapur goes, no, I'm not like you. You would have killed me, but I could kill you. You get to stay here and staff this palace. And all the Roman legionnaires, you're now citizens of my empire. Congratulations. By the way, Shapur, when he was campaigning in Syria and Palestine, he plundered, but not in the way you would expect. He didn't go house to house stealing gold. He stole people. And he brought those Roman citizens back to Persia. And he said, you live here now, and you work here now. Congratulations, you're now Persians. And there's all these Romans going, wait, what? But you also have to remember that Romans meant something complicated, right? There were Arameans and Arabs and Jews and Phoenicians and Greeks. So when I say Roman, I mean people from the empire. And so all of a sudden, now he's got all these Roman legionnaires, and he does the same thing to them. He says, you're now Persians. Congratulations. You get to live here. You built this home. You get to live in. Isn't that neat? Take up a profession. Be a baker or a butcher or something. And live out the rest of your life. You can marry Persian women or any of the Romans that I brought here, whatever. Make families. And then he had a trail built in the hills surrounding the smaller city. And then he put ticket booths. And then you could go up and you could buy a ticket and you could go and look down into a Roman town with a real live Roman emperor. He turned it into a zoo exhibit. Isn't that awesome? To me, that's like the classiest defeat story ever. And it turned out Shapur was the jealous type. Thankfully, he was the jealous type. He envied Rome for something it had that Persia didn't. The great library. He wanted one for Persia as well, so he built one in Gondishapur. He built an academy. Could we use the word library to describe the Great Library? The Great Library was a university, it was a research institution, it was a museum, it was a library. So it's weird calling it the Great Library. It makes it sound like it just was a collection of books. It wasn't just a collection of books. So he builds this in Gondi Shapur, and that's really, really, really lucky for us, especially for the story of Western civilization, because when the Romans lose it, okay, I have to explain why the Romans lose it. So I told you the 3rd century was really awful. You're starting to see why, right? The Persians are beating one Roman emperor after the other. It's not just that, though. The empire itself is breaking up from within. It's so bad, in fact, that just a few years after Shapur, in fact, I think it's the year Shapur dies, because if I remember correctly, he dies in 270. In 270, a woman named Zenobia takes over Palmyra, and her husband is assassinated. She takes over. She's ruling in the name of her son, Vabalathalis. Anyway, and then what ends up happening is she goes on a conquering spree, and she conquers the eastern half of Turkey, all of Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and all of Egypt. And she breaks it out of the Roman Empire, and she's minting coins with her son and then the emperor on it on one side. Actually, she mints some coins with her on it too, just so that everybody's clear. And she rules the Palmyran Empire for 4 years, dies, and the Romans reconquer it. But I mean, it's that bad, like chunks of the empire are coming off. Diocletian, a Roman emperor, puts the empire back together. He can't put the legions back together because by the time he sends this section of that legion here and another section of a different legion there, they're so scattered, it'll just be too expensive to bring the legions back. So they leave them scattered. So Rome will never be the same after the 3rd century. The next emperor is Constantine. Diocletian breaks the empire up into 4 pieces because he says it's too big. Constantine eventually puts it back together and becomes the only emperor. In the beginning, he's a co-emperor, but he finally puts it back together. And then he's asking himself the question, how do I make this thing last? He builds his capital in Byzantium, and of course it gets named Constantinopolis, right? And then as he's trying to figure out what to do, he goes, this religion that we've been resisting, Christianity, it might be really useful going forward. And he legalizes Christianity and he makes it one of the 2 official religions of the empire. A few decades later, it becomes the only official religion of the Roman Empire. And then in 391, I have to do some math, that would be 54 years after Constantine died, Emperor Theodosius I declares that Christianity is the only legal religion in the empire, meaning that Judaism and paganism are no longer tolerant. That year or the next, so 391 or 392, the Archbishop of Alexandria decides to use this as an opportunity to consolidate his control over the city. His name is Theophilus I. He gives a speech. It riles up a mob. The mob goes to the Jewish sector, attacks it, kills a large portion of the Jewish population. The rest of the Jews escape. They then go and look for pagans and begin killing pagans and plundering pagan homes. And then they go to the Great Library and they set it on fire and destroy that institution. The last director of the Great Library was a woman named Hypatia. She escapes. We don't know with how many books, but she got her students and the other faculty in the library to pull out as many books as they could before they were burned. So it was probably in the thousands, but not really far into the thousands. And they brought them to her home, and she became this high-class tutor, and people would send their kids to live in her house from all over the empire, and she would tutor them directly. And she got to do that for 24 years. And then Archbishop Carolus decided to kill it. And he does it really public, and it's a really brutal, ugly death. They use seashells, and they kill her with seashells. Like, just doesn't sound great. Then they take her books, they pile them, and they put her remains on top of the books, and they light them on fire. So none of the books from the Great Library survive. But there were copies. In 489, so a little bit less than 100 years later, Emperor Zeno orders that the school in Edessa, the academy in Edessa, be shut down. So one of the things Shapur did was he did expand the empire to the west. He took Nisibis and Carrhae from the Romans. So when Zeno shuts down the academy, they don't know what to do other than go to the Persian Empire. And so the scholars go with their books, and the Persians put them in Nisibis and create another academy there. But then they're nervous about it because it's too close to the Roman Empire, and there's always the possibility the Romans will take it. So eventually they decide not to do that, and they move those books to Gondi Shapur with the scholars. Then in 410, so earlier, before this school gets shut down, the Academy of Athens is restarted. In 529, Emperor Justinian I orders the academy shut down. So it only lasted 119 years. Those scholars grab their books and they go to the Persian Empire, and Emperor Khusro I puts them and their books in Gondi Shapur. So that by the time we get to 529, Gondi Shapur now has a bunch of Greek works. It has copies of Aristotle and Plato. There's Roman material there, there's Egyptian material there. And since its founding, the Persians had been collecting Indian and Chinese material as well. So in a really important way, Gondi Shapur had an edge over the Great Library because the Great Library didn't have anywhere near as much Indian and Chinese material. But Gondi Shapur maybe got to 1/10 the size of the Great Library in terms of quantity. So it had high quality, but it was missing in quantity. The reason all of this matters is because in 633, Abu Bakr is going to order Khalid ibn al-Walid to not stop. So Khalid conquers Yamama from the apostates, and that should be it. He's gone as far east as you can. Any further east and you're in the Persian Empire. And he gets a letter from the first Khalifa saying, don't stop. And Khalid's like, okay. And the next thing you know, he's fighting in what is today Kuwait, who was part of the Persian Empire. And he defeats the Persian army there, and he goes up the western side of Iraq. And then Abu Bakr orders him to invade Syria. Arabs had already invaded Syria and Palestine, but they hadn't captured anything. Khalid shows up, and that's it. Syria and Palestine belong to the Arabs. And then he's demoted, and then he's put into retirement. But the Arabs continue to expand. In 638, they captured Gondi Shapur. Usually, when conquerors conquer something they don't understand, they plunder it and then set it on fire. Right? Like, that's just the rule. What is this? It's a book. All right, put it in a pile here. We're burning it. Wait, why? I don't know what it is. It needs to be destroyed. I fear things I don't understand. That's not what happened. The Arabs go into Gondi Shapur with the Persians who have been defeated. And they're like, show us around. And so they're showing them around. Oh, you have 2 palaces. That's weird. Okay, so there was this Roman emperor named Valerian. And then they go, okay, what's this? They go, it's an academy. The Arabs go, ooh, cool, what's that? They're like, it's a place of learning and discovery and innovation. Oh, neat. What are those? They're books. Oh, cool. And then that's it. They don't set it on fire. They don't pillage it. They don't plunder it. They're just like, yeah, let's leave that alone. We don't know what it is. It's cool. Thankfully, the Arabs were humble. And instead of doing what most conquerors do, like if it had been the Mongols, they would have destroyed it. If it had been the Romans, they would have pillaged it and then destroyed it and enslaved everybody, right? This is just the modus. If it had been the Spanish, they would have pulled it to the ground and then built a church on top of it. So the world got really amazingly lucky in this moment that this group of Bedouin with this brand new religion don't do this and instead approach this humbly. So, fast forward just a little bit. As the Arabs are conquering, so by 711, they'd conquered everything from Spain and Portugal through Morocco, all the way to Pakistan, and then into what is today Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. So they own Afghanistan, Iran, they own a little piece of southeastern Turkey, Syria, Egypt, right, and the Arabian Peninsula, and then all of North Africa. That empire at that moment in 711 is the largest empire that had ever existed up until that time. Okay, so the Arabs have this massive empire. It's the largest empire to date. Up until, right, there have been plenty of empires bigger since, but there had never been anything bigger before. They had conquered the entire Persian Empire plus a little bit extra on the east side, and they had conquered about 60% of the Roman Empire. In fact, they almost conquered the Roman Empire twice. Muawiyah actually almost took Constantinople, and then another Umayyad Khalifa, just a few years later, took a second stab at it, almost got it a second time. Both times they missed because they made the first time, it was a surprise. So since I invoked Syrians earlier, I'll do it again. There was a Syrian refugee in Constantinople, and the Roman emperor said, I will give an award to anybody who can come up with a way to save us because we're finished. There's nothing we can do to save Constantinople. And the Syrian went, okay, I'm going to figure it out. And he invented the flamethrower. It was oil, as in petroleum, you know, the substance that comes out of the ground. It's black. It's really wonderful. It's completely made the world a better place and ruined it at the same time, because that's how everything on earth is. Spice, for those of you who've seen Dune, in case you were confused about the substance I'm talking about. He put it into a flamethrower, and as the Arab fleet was approaching the Roman fleet to finish it off, the Romans opened up with the flamethrowers and destroyed the Arab fleet and saved Constantinople. And then a few years later, when they do it a second time, the Romans come out and the Arabs are going to go finish the, like, wait, you don't remember what just happened? And they do it a second time. You're like, what is your, are you a cat? Do you have a smooth brain? How did you do it first time? Okay, yeah, that must have been a shock. Is that flame coming out of that tube heading towards us? But the second time, like, how could they not know? How is it gonna end? That's why you should read history. Yeah, there's lessons in it. So the Arab Empire almost finishes off the Romans. But here's the thing that's really interesting about what happens. So a state, when you think about what a state is, when you boil it down to, you strip away everything, it's really just its bureaucracy. And so the Persians, the Median Empire, Ishtuvidu was the last Median emperor. He was a Persian. He had set up this empire with a bureaucracy. When his grandson, Cyrus the Great, Kurosh, defeats him, he forces the Median Empire to join him into a co-empire. And then when Ishtuvidu dies, Kurosh is just the emperor. There's no co-emperor after that. But it's a brilliant move for so many reasons. One, it legitimizes him. But the other thing it did is it meant that he got to keep the Median bureaucracy intact. And he then merged it with the Persian and the Anshan bureaucracies. When the Persian Empire goes down under the hands of Alexander the Great, and the Seleucids take over, they don't start from zero. They just go grab the existing Persian bureaucracy and leave it in place. So in a really strange way, the Macedonian Seleucid state is really just the Persian state, but with some Greek rulers. And then when it goes down to the Parthians do the same thing. They leave the bureaucracy in place. And then when the Parthians go down, the Sasanians take over. Ardashir I, Shapur I is his dad. He leaves the bureaucracy in place. When the Arabs conquer the Persians, the Arabs go to the Persians and they go, we don't know how to run an empire. Our state is like a year old. We just figured out how to have a state. Arabs have never ruled Arabs, let alone Persians and Arameans and Greeks and Romans and Egyptians, because they're not rulable. And so what we want to do is we want to just have you guys stay right where, don't move. You're just going to be bureaucrats, but we're your new rulers. Remember when the Greeks did this? And the Persians are like, yeah, we read history. That's this. So we'll be in charge, but you're going to still run the show. The twist is, when they conquered the Roman provinces, they did the same thing with the Roman bureaucracy. So in effect, there's two bureaucracies. There's a bureaucracy running the eastern half of the Arab Empire and a bureaucracy running the western half of the Arab Empire. An Arab Empire, which, by the way, by 711 was about 60% Christian. It was a majority Christian empire to the point where Christianity had been spreading into the Persian Empire. So there was actually a huge Persian Christian population as well. And then from the other side of the Persian Empire were Buddhists. So the eastern part of the Persian Empire was Buddhist, the western part was Christian, the middle was Zoroastrian, and that's the majority of those bureaucrats. They weren't Muslim. It's just the top leadership was Muslim and they were Arab, but the bureaucrats were Christians and Zoroastrians and Buddhists. And then in the Roman Empire, what used to be the Roman Empire, they're Christians. So those two bureaucracies start competing against each other because they still hate each other's guts. They don't care that they're in the same empire and that the Arabs now rule them. They still don't like each other. Carthage, the first major battle between the Romans and the Persians, was 53 VC. The last war between the Romans and the Persians ended in 628 AD. That's 680 years of warfare. You don't do 7 centuries of warfare against the other guy, or it's like, okay, it's cool, we're cool, we were conquered, you were conquered, we're in the same up. No, it's still going. And I know there are religious reasons for this, but I'm a political scientist, I ignore those. The first, second, and third fitna, when you think about it, are that conflict expressing itself in civil war. Right? Ali ibn Abi Talib is based out of Iraq. Iraq was Persia. Muawiyah is based out of Syria. Syria was Rome. So the first fitna, in a really strange way, is a struggle that the Arabs are having internally over whether they want the arrow to point towards the Roman Empire or they want the arrow to point towards the Persian Empire. And of course, Muawiyah wins. So the Arab state ends up pointing at the Roman Empire and continues to conquer in a westward direction more vigorously than in an eastward direction. And then, of course, the second fitna doesn't last very long, but it's still kind of expressing this conversation. There's a conversation inside the empire. Which direction should we go? The third fitna starts in 744 in Khorasan, and it starts with Arab settlers who had gone to Khorasan and Persians who were sick of being part of the Arab Empire. And they eventually, long story short, because I can't get into the details, but they eventually will create the Abbasid revolution. By 3 years into this struggle, in 747, it becomes a struggle now to change the leadership from Umayyad to Abbasid. The Abbasids claimed that they were the descendants of the uncle of the Prophet. So they thought that gave them more legitimacy, and that became part of their struggle. There's really only one major battle. They defeat the Umayyads in the major battle, and then they say, let's negotiate. They bring the Umayyads, all of them except for one, to negotiate, and then they murder them. And that's the end of that. And that's how the Abbasids take over in 750 AD, when the Arab Empire was 117 years old. So it's a brand new empire. It's barely been around. One of the Umayyads escape, and he goes to Spain, and he breaks Spain off just 6 years later. 756 is the year in my head. It's probably wrong. He breaks Spain off, and at that point then, the Arab Empire begins to come apart. That's the first piece to break off, and little by little, it'll start to collapse. It's hard for me, anyway, to pinpoint the exact moment when the Arab Empire is no longer an empire. In 890, the Hamdanids break northern Syria and northern Iraq out of the empire. Considering that Baghdad was the capital and it's northern Iraq that's leaving, I kind of feel like that's it. But You could take it a little bit further. In 934, the Buyid state comes into being. And so maybe that's the moment, because the Buyids will eventually just turn the Abbasid Caliphate into a puppet state, and they'll run Iraq, Syria, and Iran as a bunch of Persians. So that's definitely the end of the Arab Empire by that point. But something really amazing happens. Something earth-shattering and world-changing happens. Once the Abbasid revolution takes place, they'll eventually move the capital to Baghdad. Not right away, obviously, but they eventually move it there. Baghdad was the name of a Persian village that then became Medinat al-Salam, but Baghdad stuck. The name City of Peace didn't. In other words, its Persian origins really took hold. And the Persian bureaucracy now is operating there, and the Roman bureaucracy is now just provincial. They're not in charge. In other words, the Abbasid revolution put the Persian bureaucracy on top. It's too late for the Roman bureaucracy. And then all of a sudden, major innovations start to take place. The Arab agricultural revolution. To do that, the Arabs actually created private property. Because you got to remember, the system that they inherited from the Persians and the Romans was a peasant-based system. So the Persians had peasant farmers, the Romans had peasant farmers. So the Arab Empire under their Umayyads had a bunch of peasants. They had lords and peasants. The Abbasids went, you know what? This is so archaic. Why are we doing this? They took away the nobles, and then they deeded the land off to the peasants and went, you're now farmers. You own this land. Do with it what you want. And of course, most people, when given that kind of freedom, are going to really mess things up. So it's a disaster. A bunch of farmers over-farm their land. They wreck the fertility of the soil. They go bankrupt. But other farmers start experimenting, because now that it's private and they own the profits, they have an incentive to increase the profits. And that creates the Arab agricultural revolution. They figure out crop rotation. They start building water wheels to power mills. They start looking for alternative foods to grow. They find coffee. They take the coffee bean from Ethiopia and they plant it in Mocha, Yemen. And the next thing you know, there's a whole coffee industry. They figure out if you pack ice onto a ship, you can put fresh food on it and you can sell it in India. They change the way we do food. In addition to that, right around the same time period as the Arab agricultural revolution, Al-Kindi goes into Wadi Shapur and starts pulling out books on Greek philosophy and reading them, translating them into Arabic and trying to figure them out. Khwarazmi, the Persian, goes into the same place and starts pulling out Indian works, and he starts trying to figure out mathematics. And the next thing you know, Khwarazmi has invented algebra and the world's first algorithm. And when Romans hear about him, they try to say his name, and instead of saying al-Khwarazmi, it comes out algorithm. And so every time you say algorithm, you're kind of saying Khwarazmi's name. He's probably really happy about it. Just like, why can't you pronounce it? Anyway, poor guy. So notice though, there's not a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences, not with politics, not with culture, not with something as important as this. When the Abbasid revolution takes place, that's when the Arab Empire suddenly gets interested in Gondi Shapur. Why? The Persians had a history of embracing philosophy and science and actually fostering it. The Romans had literally just destroyed the Great Library, shut down the school in Edessa, shut down the academy in Athens. The Romans had been going in that direction. So when the Umayyads went in that direction, they just went along for the ride. But now that the Abbasids have flipped and gone in the Persian direction, the Persians are like, look, there's this amazing institution. We need to get in there. We need to start looking for the material that we can use to advance our civilization. And that's the birth of the Islamic Golden Age. It's in that moment, the Abbasid revolution. In other words, had Shapur the First not created the academy at Gondi Shapur, it might not have happened. If the Arabs hadn't conquered the Persians, they'd only conquered the Romans, it might not have happened. There was this moment where it was like the perfect storm. Enough things had lined up just right so that in 832, al-Ma'mun, the Khalifa, the Abbasid Khalifa, goes and says, we need to move the Gondi Shapur books to the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. And then that triggers a whole new phase for the Islamic Golden Era. At some point, Bukhara ends up so well developed and goes into philosophy so deeply, into science so deeply, it becomes a rival of Baghdad. And of course, Damascus, and then eventually Cairo after it's founded, and Cordoba, and Timbuktu. One of the interesting things about the Islamic Golden Age is it isn't centered in one city. Yes, a lot of it takes place in Baghdad, but it's not exclusively Baghdad. It's spread out throughout the entirety of the area. By the time Bukhara is doing it, the Samanids are the Persian rulers of Central Asia. They're not Arabs anymore. One of the things that's fascinating to me about the Islamic Golden Age is it's Arab philosophers, Persian philosophers, there's Christian philosophers, and there's Jewish philosophers. It's not one group of people, it's a bunch of people. That's only possible because it was a tolerant society that allowed for you to be from a different religion or a different culture and still prosper and thrive. And I think that's one of the most important parts of this is if they had been intolerant like the Romans, where they were trying to Romanize everything, it wouldn't have worked. Okay, so to be clear about the Romans, the Roman Empire, when you think about it, was really a Ponzi scheme. It was built on two things happening, well, one thing happening consistently, and that thing was conquest. The reason they had to constantly conquer was they had to constantly plunder wealth, because when I was a kid, I was told the Romans were great inventors. It's not true. They didn't invent much. I was told that they were really great at innovating. It's, again, not true. They were great merchants. Again, not true. They conquered people who were decent merchants, but they themselves really weren't into it. What they did was they created a great war machine. And then they used that war machine to conquer other people and then plunder their wealth and then take over their trade routes and then steal their technology and also, of course, enslave a portion of that population. That only worked as long as the Romans could keep conquering, but at some point they had conquered past their technology's ability to allow them to go any further. So when I was a kid, I was taught the Romans invented roads. That's dumb. The first person to walk from point A to point B 20 times invented the first road. Like, I don't even understand how that goes through a person's mind when you say it. I think what they meant was they invented the first paved roads. That's not true, but that's maybe what they meant. The ancient Egyptians invented the first paved road about 5,000 years ago when they took petrified wood logs, split them in half, and used them to build a road so that they could move stuff from a stone quarry out. I think it's cool that they did petrified logs. Look at these trees. How did they get so hard? This is my great road material. And then even before the Romans began building roads, the Celts were making corduroy roads out of wood, not petrified, just wood. And then, so I think maybe they meant the world's first paved roads, like as in cement roads. But that's also not true. They were in the Middle East. The Middle East did cement roads first. What the Romans did do, however, was build an extensive road network that was with cement, and it was incredible. They didn't invent it, but they did something that nobody else had ever done. And they built this spider web across Europe and North Africa and Southwest Asia so that they could maximize the distance their legions could get to conquer. But they had reached that limit. Romania, named after the Romans, was the limit. They got to Romania, they conquered it, they enslaved the population, they erected a tower to celebrate the genocide, and they went, I guess we're done because we can't go any further. But they got really, 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 really lucky because in 31 BC, they conquered Egypt. And Egypt had the Great Library. It meant that they didn't have to conquer to get new technology anymore. They could just rely on the Great Library innovating. So the Roman formula wouldn't have worked in the period that the Islamic Golden Era takes place in, because the Islamic Golden Era isn't trying to conquer to get its new technology or wealth. It's trying to trade and innovate to get its new technology and wealth. That's a really different mindset. So it needed to be like this convergence of culture, moment, history, Shapur the first, Gondi Shapur. Isn't that cool? So to make sure we're clear, because I don't want to just leave it like that, Ibn al-Haytham, in the 11th century, he's going to write the Book of Optics, 1021. He created the world's first scientific method. He postulated that he thought all objects in the universe exerted gravity on each other. I don't experience that, I don't feel the like wanting to come hit me in the face. I mean, I do because I keep gesturing, but it's not because of gravity. Like, what experience did he have that made him go, oh, that chair is exerting gravity on me? Like the ground, sure, but he said that light had a finite speed and it traveled in waves. We've lost most of his material. We think he wrote 120 books. I think we have 20 books. So maybe in some of those books, it's explained how he got there. Well, we don't know. He was doing calculus. He was doing calculus 600 years before Newton. Ibn Sina, a contemporary of his, who had started in the Samanid state, it got conquered by the Turks and he fled, and he ends up eventually, long story short, in Isfahan, and he'll write the Canon of Medicine in 1025. One of the things that's interesting about Ibn Sina is he starts reading Plato and Aristotle, and he realizes something about the universe, that as time goes by, information increases. And then it means if you go backwards in time, information decreases. And of course, he then is describing entropy. That's what entropy is. But then he runs the clock back on the entire universe, and he says, the entire universe at one point was a small little packet of information, and the entire universe unfolded from that packet because there was just enough information in that packet for the universe. That's Big Bang. That's the singularity. That was 1,000 years ago. He wrote the Canon of Medicine 1025. It's the 1000th anniversary. For the record, he usually wrote in Arabic, but he frequently wrote in Persian. He never was in an Arabic majority area. He was always in a Persian majority area. But in a way, he marks this switch because it's right about there when Persian starts to become the dominant language of science in the East. So in the Asian part of the Arabs, what the Arabs conquered. And then in the West, Arabic stays. So in other words, in Cairo and Cordoba and Timbuktu, Arabic is the dominant language. But in Isfahan and Bukhara and Samarkand, Persian is the dominant language. And, so that by the time we got to Nizam al-Mulk and he's writing Siyasatnameh, he's writing it in Persian. So there's this cultural shift, this switch that's taking place, because in this really strange way, that Persian conversation was still going. It never stopped. But we're the beneficiaries of it, because when the books in Gondi Shapur are discovered, again, right after the Abbasid Revolution, because they were just sitting there gathering dust. After the Abbasid Revolution, people start going in there. Not only do they create this age where there's major discoveries that are made, it means that we can start reading Aristotle and Plato again, because the Romans had destroyed their copies of Aristotle and Plato. And so little by little, through things like the Reconquista, where the Christian Arabs in the north who hate Muslims and Jews conquer Spain and make Spain and drive the Muslims and Jews out. As they're doing this, they're capturing Arab libraries. And those Arab libraries have Plato and Aristotle in them. They were told to burn them, But what did the monks do, the Dominican monks? They, Benedictine monks, instead of burning them, they built these giant, secret, illegal underground libraries and kept copies of those books and slowly started to translate them back into ancient Greek and Latin. And that's how we have that material again. And that feeds the Renaissance. That's part of what feeds the Renaissance. Another part that feeds the Renaissance is the Arabs conquered Sicily. So the Arabs conquer Sicily. They're there for 2 centuries. And then a group of really crazy French-speaking Vikings called the Normans end up in Italy. They're there as mercenaries. They're bored. They notice they're the only armed guys in southern Italy. So they take over southern Italy. And then they're like, you know what? I bet the Arabs can't keep Sicily if we attack it. Let's attack it. They attack it. And then they end up the rulers of Sicily. So think of how crazy Sicilian history is. Like Greek colonies that get conquered by the Romans. And then the Germans take it over. The Vandals take it over. Then the Arabs take it. And then Vikings take Sicily. Like if you're a Sicilian, like how do you identify? Like there's no way a genetic test will give you anything but crazy at that point. And so these Normans, like Roger II, for example, fall madly in love with Arab culture. He falls so in love with Arab culture that his bureaucracy is made up of Jews, Muslims, and Christians. He didn't purge the Sicilian bureaucracy. He mints coins on one side in Latin, on the other side he mints them in Arabic. He, in fact, becomes the patron for Muhammad al-Idrisi, the mapmaker. So there's this Christian ruler in Sicily who's funding Muslim scholarship. And then, a little bit further down the line, Friedrich II ends up in charge of Sicily. Through marriage, he ends up with a German last name, because he's part German. So he's part German, part Norman. And he's the ruler of Sicily. He speaks 6 languages, including Arabic. He's reading Arab philosophy, Arab science. He's translating some of it into Latin. He's writing his own textbooks on falconry, because he falls in love with falconry. He becomes such a big fan of Arab culture, and Arabs become such a big fan of him, that Arabs decide to give him the title King of Jerusalem just a few years after the Crusades ended. As a gift. Like, there's no conquest, there's no violence. Like, yeah, why don't you be the King of Jerusalem? He also becomes the Holy Roman Emperor, gets excommunicated a couple of times by the Pope because he makes the Pope mad because he likes science. Eventually, Sicily will also trigger the Renaissance because people get inspired by what's happening in Sicily. And then there's Venice. So the Venetians, I'm going to give it a talk on Venice, so I don't want to give it away. But the Venetians did one thing that other European states didn't do, and it was trade with Muslims. Most Christian states refused to trade with Muslim states. Well, what did Europe have? It had wool. But if you wanted silk, you had to get it through trade with Muslim states. If you wanted cotton, you needed to get it from trade with Muslim states. If you wanted black pepper, you needed to get it through trade with Muslim states. In other words, somebody needed to step up and go, yeah, I don't mind trading with Muslims. Venice. And so the Venetians had this really powerful, intimate relationship with the Arab world, with the Muslim world. They, by the way, they really liked a lot of Muslim fashions, a lot of Arab fashions that they started bringing back with them. And the Arabs had adopted sarvar, which is a Persian word, which means at your service, basically. And they would say that to the Venetians, and the Venetians heard savo, and then savo turned into ciao. And the Germans heard that and went tschüss. And that's how Persian got into the German language as bye-bye. Isn't that crazy? So between Spain, what's going on in Spain, what's going on in Sicily, what's going on in Venice, little by little, Europe starts to come out of this and eventually decides to do the Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth. Well, rebirth what? Rebirth the ancient world. Well, how do you rebirth the ancient world? You burnt it to the ground. You destroyed all those libraries. And the answer was, get a hold of the manuscripts that the Arabs still have, and then get all the science they created with the Persians and then advance it to the next level, which is what brings in the fifth age, the one that we're in now. One of the things that I love about doing these talks at the Museum of the Future is the Museum of the Future is, right? I mean, its theme is the future. The future is really scary and exciting at the same exact time, right? This could go really well for us, or it'll be like Terminator, and there'll be robots rolling over our skulls as they're shooting us with lasers. You know, like this, we're at that moment. This is that moment. And I guess that's one of the things that we're trying to do to a degree is maybe look to the past for how we can avoid getting back to triggering another dark age. I think what Dubai is doing, what the UAE in general is doing, is triggering another renaissance. I love what this place is doing. It's why I wanted to be a part of it. That's why I'm here. And so what I'm hoping is we're actually starting, instead of doing what we normally do, which was we do one of these ages and then we go into a bad period and then we do another age and go into a bad period. What if we just went to the next period without the intermediate bad period? Wouldn't that be a cool idea? Like, I'm just throwing that out there. What's our plan for global warming, though? That's a big, scary question mark for me. I don't know if y'all know, we're on the front line. Anyway, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.